All right, guys, we're back with another episode. We have Dr. Scott Stevenson with us this week. Dr. Scott, thanks for coming on.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
And then always, Paul O'Need. How's everything going, buddy?
It's great. Enjoying a nice Tuesday. It's my day off the gym, so a little slower going. Got 3 more hours in my day to do stuff. So yeah, enjoying the time.
You have a cutoff time for your day where you're like, now I'm done working, and you separate work from play or work from rest?
About 8 p.m.
Yeah. That's what I do too.
Yeah, definitely.
It's not so much that I want to cut it off. It's just that I know that I'm useless at a certain point in time. Also to where true. I know if I'm watching the TV or if I'm trying to read something or trying to look at research or do schoolwork, I know at 7:30, there's no way I'm going to hold on to that. So what's the point of even doing it? So I try to do more mindless things to wind down, because I go to bed at 9. So I'm at 7:30 to 9, I'm done. There's nothing that I can do that's going to be productive. So then I just try to find out the best ways that I can fall asleep and be asleep in the fastest amount of time within that time period.
Yeah. Sleep hygiene and sleep rituals are so important for me, especially too. Like the room's got to be right. And like you have to shift gears, find the off switch is what my uncle used to call it.
Yeah. And I found that the more I can do that, the better because I track with my Oura ring and I can see the improvements. Like I started doing sauna about 2 hours before bed. And ever since I started doing that, I've been able to have deeper sleep. My deep sleep increased twofold because I'm doing the sauna before bed. So I do the sauna and then I'll take a shower and then I'll let my body naturally start to cool down. And by it cooling down allows me to get to the body temperature that I need to get to go to sleep faster, to get into REM and deep sleep more efficiently and a lot faster throughout the night.
Oh, I wanted to get a shower. I remodeled my house, but long story, the guy I hired was not actually licensed. He was a complete shyster.
Oh,
and I had a sauna all picked out and everything. And like, then it kind of all fell through when I had to, pick up the pieces. But
oh geez, you were getting your whole garage remodeled, right? Was that them?
I was getting, I don't really have a garage. I just have a carport, but I had a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah,
I was going to get done.
That was that company that was remodeling everything.
This guy was the penultimate shyster. He's as bad as I could possibly be. I had some people come in afterwards who actually did some really, really bad work, who were legitimately licensed, but the guys before them, this guy was, And the worst thing about it, I guess, was that like I sent in like a 21-page report to every set of government officials I could, the state, the feds, the county sheriffs, the local police, and they just ghosted me. No one would do anything about it. This guy took me for massive amounts of money.
Oh my gosh.
And he did it.
Horrible.
He did it. Yeah, he did it while he was stealthy. He did it while I was spending a lot of my time south of here helping my mom take care of my dad, who was dying of and then died of cancer. So, and anytime you get all the, like, I could go on, if I told the whole story about this, the things that they would be lighting the torches. There would be probably people wanted to come get him, and he's easy to find. Like I literally, I knew what his address was, and he had a police report. They could have just gone, and he's on the lam now, from what I understand. He doesn't show up for his court appearances on Zoom or anything.
You're too nice of a guy, Dr. Scott.
I had some friends, like some people who's like,
I bet you did.
I'm sure you got some friends.
And I'm like, I thought about it, but I think my life still, all in all, is better than his, and
Oh yeah.
I think he truly is a sociopath. So there's just no way.
You'd have to be.
Yeah, I'll tell you this, and I don't want to throw us off, but the thing that was the worst thing he did is after, and this is connected actually because I got it right here. This book, my book, little advertising here, was dedicated to my dog Rusty.
Mm-hmm.
And so Rusty had died. He knew that. He was feigned being a dog lover and all these things. And my dad passed, and I was between coming home from my dad passing to stopping back here and then go up to Illinois for the funeral. And he said, Scott, we got a couple things we're going to show you. Come back in here, and there's it's like a fish pond. It's kind of worn down. It's like, I thought about building that out, like putting a deck on there and setting up with the grill and maybe a canopy. And he's like, here's what we want to do. We got some extra money we've been saving along the way from what you paid us, and we want to set this up. We want to tile this and deck this out, just like you talked about. I know it was on the plan, but we want to do this for you because you've been such a good guy. And we need to get a picture of Rusty and your dad so we can make this a, you know, tribute to them. And I'm thinking, like, these are the nicest people in the entire world. Like,
Oh my
I mean, I'm
God.
crying, you know, because this is like, it's the coolest thing anyone's ever done for me. And it's total bullshit. Total bullshit. That's how I know it's sickening, isn't it? I mean, I can laugh at it now.
Oh, it's sickening.
Yeah, I was like bragging about this guy, you know, because I thought he was just the most awesome things in sliced bread, and he was.
Oh my God.
Cat. Anyway,
that's unfortunate. Yeah, it's so unfortunate to hear that happening in general, but to hear it happen in such a good person, and you know.
Oh, thanks, man. Yeah.
Gutted, man. But
yeah, we can cut that out. We don't need to keep that in.
If Tony's not one for editing.
Okay.
Yeah, it goes beyond my technical skills to edit these things. So we just
the podcast
rolling.
will be out like an hour after as soon as your computer can upload it, it's going out.
Yes, sir. But yeah, no, if you do get a chance to do the sauna, it's I just bought one from Heavenly Heat, and it was like $5,500 infrared sauna. Okay. So it's not super expensive, and it has wheels and you can move it around. So I just have it in the garage next to all my gym equipment. Nice. Yeah. So it's
What's
super
the square
nice.
Footage? Just out of curiosity?
It's a two-person infrared. I think it's 4.5 to 5 by 8, if I remember correctly. Okay. And then they can also put out, like they could put outside, they outside treated it so that if I did want to have it outside on my patio, I can have it outside and the weather wouldn't erode it or anything like that. So that was like an extra $500.
I'm building out a stealth trailer for when the Armageddon comes full fold.
Oh, geez.
And literally, I got a shower in there, and I built the sink, and I've got a fold out bed, and I built the closet, and I'm putting my gym in there too. My home gym's going to go in. I've got space for it, so I think I think I'll have enough room for sauna. Maybe I can
there you go.
There. Yeah,
there you go. That's awesome.
Nice. Yeah,
that's like the new wheels. The new Tom Hanks movie where the end of the world came, and he has this trailer with like his dog and he built a robot and stuff.
Right. I saw that. I saw, well, I can watch it in German too. So I'm going to probably watch that maybe this weekend.
Yes. It looks really
good.
Bad. Yeah. It's not a bad movie at all.
Yeah. It looks pretty funny. Really kind of the way the jokes, you know?
Yeah. It's a good movie. But yeah, so we have Dr. Scott on today to kind of go over and fill in the gaps of all the hormone stuff we were talking about with Victoria Felkar and Gillis as well. So we have him on because we know that, at least me and Paul know that you are kind of one of the lead authorities when it comes to this type of stuff, as far as like within our community, both within the science and just through practical real world experience of being a bodybuilder for over 30 plus years and being a coach. So we figured we'd come to you, and I listened to Robert Sapolsky. He was doing a podcast, and he was talking about testosterone and some of the negative kind of connotations that come along with testosterone due to the way it's been criminalized and due to the way it's been portrayed throughout the media. And I thought it'd be interesting to just have a talk about these type of sex hormones, what they actually do, what their jobs are in the human body, estrogen, testosterone, and things along that line, and how it can play into performance and body composition and stuff like that. So I figured you'd be a great person to have on, and you sent me 4 slides to go over, and no one's done that before. So I feel like we're already starting at a high level here.
Like what I said before, like you, and then like,
I actually have like a 20 slide PowerPoint that, because this is such a, I've been thinking that my stress with this podcast has been, I want to give everyone sort of a real good foundational understanding of hormones and hormonal axes and how things work. And it's so hard to do. Not everyone's a visual learner.
Yeah.
But it's so hard to do, even in language, because even if I could somehow manage to explain everything perfectly, it's so complex, you know, it would be unintelligible. And this is why, you know, that this would take, you know, 2 hours or a whole week's worth of lectures in an anatomy and physiology course,
Right.
just to kind of get the basic ideas.
Yeah, you should. I mean, I would highly recommend, because I know a lot of coaches are doing this now, is like just a week long type of lecture where people pay money. They'll do you can present the course in a week, and then, you know, whatever class it is. Like I did Jason Theobald's class on reading blood work and fixing estrogen dominance in females. And it was like a 4-hour course. And
Nice.
you should consider doing something like that on this. If you have all the material, I think it would do really well.
I've got about a dozen lectures that I've done at various times. I've got one that I really probably I've got two. I've got one on peak week, which I think is important, just because, you know, that week before shows is one that's probably has the greatest risk of incurring some really negative health effects, to put it lightly.
Yeah.
You know, with diuretics, we'll just say it point blank. And also I've got a talk on that, a talk on bodybuilding pharmacology 101 that I gave for the first time a few years ago in the UK. And I think I've given it a couple times now. And that one is just so loved by everyone because it's funny. And I've been in this situation. You know, Paul, we were talking about learning things and this sort of thing. I remember when I started graduate school in Texas, I went in just like a general master's degree program. And then I sort of decided that I wanted to go into like the full blown exercise phys, because I just wanted to be the world's best personal trainer when I first started. That's all I wanted. And that was kind of my idea. And so then I had a summer opportunity to take a carbohydrate metabolism class. And it was actually with John Ivey, who's got a book on nutrient time. He's sort of a little bit well known. So, and he was the second on my master's thesis, it turned out, but he needed to have like 4 people in order to do that class in the summer. And I didn't have any of the prereqs for that class. I'd taken anatomy and physiology, and and carbohydrate metabolism is his game. So he's like, yeah, let's go, baby. And he just went in at 101% on that. And I'm like, well, I don't know what the hell's going on. But I just started to piece things together. And like, literally, it wasn't until the very end of the class, I'm like, oh, those two things are connected in this way metabolically. And that's where this goes. Because I had to like started drawing out like everything so I could kind of connect the dots. And I remember like how difficult that was, trying to piece together these disconnected pieces of information, because I didn't have a fundamental understanding of what he's talking about. Had I taken that class in the appropriate sequence, and I willingly did it. I'm like, you know, give me the challenge. I'll, you know, hit me with the hammer, see if I can handle it, you know. And I survived, but having this baseline understanding of hormones and how they work, I think is super important. So I guess we can just kind of dive in, and maybe if you can, will you be able to throw up the figure while we're speaking?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
You just tell me the figure number. I have them laid out.
Oh yeah. The first one, I think that I sent you. Let me see what order I sent them in here.
Yep. The hypothalamus connected pituitary.
The one that was just before that with target cells.
Let's see. Yep. We got it pulled up here.
Oh, look at that. That's beautiful. Okay, cool. So if anyone just look on the lower right of this, you see those things that look like little eyes. Those are the light blue. Sorry for those who are colorblind if you can't tell, but the light blue, yellow, and the green on the right are just different cells. Those little things that look like the pupils, those are actually the nuclei of those cells. And when we talk about hormones, for the most part, what we're talking about is the endocrine system. We're talking about steroids, talking about, and by the way, just as an aside, people will talk about, quote, hormones when they're referring to anabolic androgenetic steroids that are drugs. Those aren't technically hormones because they're not produced by the body. It's kind of a softer way of saying I'm using drugs. It's like I'm using hormones. It's like, nah, they have hormonal actions, but they're not really hormones. I think, you know, nandrolone is produced in itsy bitsy amounts, but, you know, it's not thought of as a physiologically active hormone. So most of the time we're talking about are hormones that are bloodborne, if you look on the lower right there, and I want to use my mouse to indicate this, but see where it says endocrine, what you have there, yeah, there you go. So that if you look at that red thing there is supposed to be a blood vessel. So that's the bloodstream. And you have a situation where the yellow cell would release something into the blood, and then it goes from the endocrine cell or the glandular cell, and then it goes to a target cell, which would be the green one. So from left to right. Yep, you got it.
So it goes from there to there.
Yeah,
that's there.
So that's an endocrine action. The cool thing, and where this gets a lot more complicated, is that you can also have local actions where, and this is where things like icosanoids, which are going to be like prostaglandins and leukotrienes and prostacyclines and things like that act locally, are also considered hormones of a sort, and those would be having a paracrine action. So that's where the yellow, the arrow from the yellow cell to the light blue cell on the left there. So for instance, prostaglandins are involved with inflammation, and when we take a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory like naproxen, that inhibits cyclooxygenase, which is the rate-forming enzyme for prostaglandin synthesis. So we're blocking that local communication between cells. So this is where this is so cool, because we've got this endocrine system where the cells can act sort of from one part of the body to the other through the bloodstream. That's an endocrine action. They can act very locally from one cell type to another. That's a paracrine action. And they actually sort of can communicate with themselves or with one another as a cluster, so they can coordinate what they're releasing. And that's an autocrine action. So auto means self. Automobile, self-driving, for instance, where that root of that word comes from. So mainly what we're talking about here when we're talking about estrogen and the sex hormones are endocrine things. But the endocrine, you can also have endocrine actions that then elicit paracrine and autocrine actions. So, and there's, this is why you have entire courses in medical school, like entire years just learning about the endocrine system. Yeah, right. You know this. So and as of what's another important bit, and I don't have a figure for this, but a big picture idea here is that the nervous system is the fast acting counterpart to the endocrine system or the hormones in the body. So your nervous system, you want to move a muscle, then you can do that immediately. You've got a nerve that communicates from the brain, so actually several nerves communicate from the brain to the muscles, and that produces the movement. An endocrine action could be actually fairly rapidly. So for instance, if you have a fight or flight reaction, you would start moving really rapidly, and you can have an epinephrine release. And that would elicit glycogenolysis and would ready the body psychologically and physiologically for immediate action. And that's a hormonal phenomenon, but it doesn't happen quite in the same time frame as a neurological phenomenon, like moving a muscle would be. So just to take that forward a little bit, because I'm just kind of going with the flow here with what people probably would follow, is that if you get a stress reaction like that, a long-acting hormone involved with the stress reaction is cortisol, or glucocorticoids, and then the mineralocorticoids too. So imagine a really stressful situation that's persistent. You would have a cortisol reaction. That's going to also influence your fuel use. Glucocorticoids stimulate glycogenolysis in the liver. Too much, too long suggests something's really run awry with the situation at hand. There's a lot of stress. We want to make sure we're able to evade that in some way, hopefully. So glucocorticoids also will break down protein, which will provide amino acid precursors for the brain or for the liver to produce glucose for the brain. The brain runs better on glucose. It obviously can run ketones. We know that as well, but it does that. So mineralocorticoids are things like aldosterone, and those actually cross-bind with the glucocorticoid receptor. But those are involved with retaining water. So having body water around so you can conserve it. Let's say if you're running from the bear, or you have to migrate somewhere, or you've got a highly stressful situation, you have to do a lot of work, you want to be able to hold on to water. so you can thermoregulate. We would need to be able to, as humans, the main way we're going to lose body heat, especially in a really high stress situation, is through sweating. So, and water is, you know, in high demand. You can die pretty rapidly if you don't hold on to body water. So we don't want to just be flushing out water and urinating unnecessarily. So that's like just a little kind of example of the nervous system in conjunction with the hormones that are, some are short acting, some are long acting. So you guys wanted to talk about the sex hormones, I think, today.
Yes, sir.
Right? Yeah. So I got someone to look here at some of my notes, see anything I missed I wanted to talk about.
But that's great, though, the covering that aspect of things, because we have so many times where clients check in and they've had a high stress week and their weight's gone up. And now that kind of can connect the dots of how the cortisol stress can interact with that weight retention and water retention. So they can kind of get an idea about it a little bit better. And once they understand the nuances of it, then they feel a little bit better when they check in, right? And they're like, oh, I know what's going on. I know when my weight's up, and now it all makes sense from a physiological standpoint.
Right. I mean, and you see that, of course, with the menstrual cycle. And I listened to a little bit of the podcast with Victoria, so I think she covered maybe some of those things. But you've got water fluctuations there with women that you really have to take into account. With women that I've coached, you know, with guys, I can just give me your body weight, you know, on Monday, you know, same time, same. Women, it's like, okay, nope, it's all over the place.
Right.
Give me your weekly average, you know, and maybe even the highs and lows. Sometimes they'll just send me the whole thing, because they'll put in a spreadsheet and they just send me the whole string of numbers. Kind of see what's going on, because the variability will sometimes tell you something as well. How much they're traveling around. If you see a lot of variability, like, well, you know, I've traveled so much this week, or I've got this, that, and the other going on, then you can know, okay, you know, this has just been a stressful week because there's been so very much variability. That tells you about the baseline stress levels.
Yeah.
So there's applicability there for peak week. The one thing with the way that I do peak, I'm just tossing out bodybuilding related things so the pieces can come together for people, that I do peak week with no diuretics that can get people, is if they stress out really bad. So I like to run a practice run. So they've been there, they've seen it all happen. They know the process works, or they know with the modifications they're going to do, they can rest assured that what they've done or what they're doing this week is not going to run awry. There's no guesswork involved, really. For the most part, you've just kind of got a plan and you're going to execute it. And when your weight goes up during the carb up, it's okay. If you spill over a little bit, that means you filled up. That's good. But if the only time I've seen this not work, with three cases, if someone's been prescribed a diuretic, so their normal hormones of water homeostasis are sort of outworked by the drugs. So they're outcompeted by the drugs. If someone's taking in, and this is a drug related thing too, massive amounts of caffeine, then they don't have that available as a diuretic because they're habituated to it. So you can't increase that a tad to try to exert a diuretic effect. And they're probably a little less sensitive, I think, generally to things that would cause diuresis because they're already taking a massively effective diuretic. Or, case in point, someone's stressed out all the hell.
Right.
And I've seen that happen. So, and that's just the psychogenic thing. That's literally, you know, if it were different, if they didn't know that the contest was the next day and it were just like a Friday night when they're just chilling at home and they could sleep in the next morning, and be no problem.
Right.
But
Yeah. We see that a lot with powerlifting too, right? Just the week of the anxiety and all that building up into the meet, right? And they just allow that week of not really training, of just thinking about the meet, their own expectations, the pressure they're putting on themselves. And that builds all that anxiety. So by the time the meet day comes, they've already had such sympathetic arousal throughout the whole week that there's nowhere else for them to go on meet day. And they're just gassed and they have nothing in the tank.
And I know some guys too will intentionally taper in a way that this is from experience, that works with them and their mentality, their personality, how much they stress, where they're so pent up, they can't wait to get on the platform.
Right.
Because they're going to make Atlas their bitch, because they're just going to go to war. And they do that intentionally though. When I was in Texas, we were talking about Texas before the podcast. When I was in Texas, I got to train with the powerlifting team a little bit. Jan and Terry Todd are there, and Yeah, or Terry's now passed on, but they were
They
there.
just
And
did you see the not to interrupt, but did you see what Rogue did on Terry Todd?
I saw a few things came out recently. I don't know
They
if
did
Rogue had done it.
they did an hour and 20-minute documentary on the Todds and everything that Terry's done. It's a really, really good documentary about what the Todds have put together out there at Texas and his whole legacy. I thought they did a great job with it.
I need to watch that. Yeah.
That was great. Yeah.
Yeah. I know that came through, and I like I said, I'm focusing on the German stuff right now, doing sort of that thing, but I need to watch that because I'm sure.
Oh, you'd love it. You'd love it.
That's cool. Well, I get to go up there and train with those guys every once in a while because I was teaching the weight training classes. I was a GA for them, and a couple of their powerlifters were sort of my teaching assistant, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And those guys, they call it the 50-step rule the week before a meet. So these guys would just skip class. They just didn't give a shit. Powerlifting was everything for them, and they would just not go. And they try to take no more than 50 steps in a day.
Yes.
So they just lied around and did nothing.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And you know what's interesting? Of course, that's gonna, like, if you can do that, and then really recover, and if you overreach properly, if that fits in, like that could work. It's extreme. It could make you just overly anxious if you're just lying there, like fancy, not knowing what to do with yourself.
I'd be so sore.
Yeah, after the meet, you'd be a wreck.
No. That week of not
lying
moving.
Around.
Yeah.
Be stiff. Yeah, maybe
Yeah.
sore. Yeah, stiff for sure.
These guys were like in their 20s, so
they're bulletproof.
They're bulletproof at that point. Yeah. The thing too is interesting is, like, if you look, like, the fastest way to eat.
Cut off. He'll come right, but he'll be back. He's done enough podcasts to where his Wi-Fi is usually pretty good. But yeah, have you seen that documentary?
But yeah, I did. I don't know if it's available in Canada because we have different Netflixes.
It's not on Netflix. It's on YouTube. The Origin of Power, I think it is, by Rogue.
No way. I didn't even see it. Okay, I'll look for it though.
Yeah, it was so good. They kind of didn't promote it as they should have. So when you look at the thumbnail, you're like, oh, I don't really know what this is, but it's a complete documentary thing of Terry Todd and the Todds and how he trained Bill Kazmaier and all those guys and worked with them and just his legacy.
That's so super cool.
Yeah. And when I wanted to take a trip down to the University of Texas and just to see that museum that they have built there. And because it's just such high quality of like all the athletics, strength sports that have been around.
Right. Oh, that'd be cool.
But yeah, Texas, even in and of itself, is just one of those states where they have like powerlifting in high school, and powerlifting is such a big thing out there.
Oh yeah.
Because in Florida they have powerlifting, but it's like clean and press and like
bench.
A deadlift and a bench. Yeah, clean and press, bench, and deadlift. Dr. Scott said his computer totally crashed.
Oh shoot.
So we'll see.
Oh well. You'll be editing this anyway. You'll have to use your editing skills.
Dare you? No, I will not. This will just stay on.
No, we're gonna just keep it in. Just keep it in and just chat. All right.
Yeah, he sent 4 things to go over, and hopefully we'll get to them. But we'll continue. I just text him, see if he'll be able to get it back up and going. Because when someone says crash, then it's like, is it completely gone, or did it just need to reboot? And we were just talking about that before, how he was doing Zoom calls, and like as soon as he went on a Zoom, it was like it needed to update, and he missed like the first 8 minutes.
Mine, my laptop crashed last week.
Oh,
it had been periodically, like I would open it for the first time of the day, and it would just be like a static screen for a couple seconds, and then run normally. And it just kept doing that, and I was like, "This happened last time. I need to get a new laptop." And then the day I put the order through, it crashed. So I like called my mom. I'm like, I need another laptop right now, like whatever. Because she has a couple MacBooks for her business. And she was like, yeah, sure. So she got MacBook, and then, it was just like super, anyway, it was stressful.
Yeah, because my laptop's pretty old. All my programming's on it and stuff. So if that goes down, then I'm like, oh, I got to start from scratch with everyone. And
One of these, man.
what is
Just
that?
back an
Is that
external.
a hard drive, external hard
Yeah.
drive?
Yeah, give them external, back everything up. Adult stuff.
Yeah, I need it. That's why I got I got a desktop as well. So
Oh yeah. Old guy.
how's the leg holding up?
It's good. It's good. My left hip, so it was the left hamstring, and the left knee is the one that usually gives me problems. But there's a lot of like changing variables in my training right now. So I kind of didn't really expect as much of a challenge, but my left knee, there's no pain, but it doesn't feel as good as it did. So
Makes sense, right? Because hamstring's injured, you're going to lose stability within that movement pattern. And
exactly. And my volume came up through like the assistance stuff. So everything came up. There was a bunch of variables that changed. So I went and got worked on at the chiro today. Just typical, like the exact same stuff that every time I flare up that side, he does, and I get some almost immediate relief. So yeah, I'm not really concerned about that. Everything else feels good. I'm really enjoying training though. I'm like, I go into the gym and I'm having fun and like actually working hard and sweating, which is nice.
Yeah. It feels good, man. It does feel good when you leave the gym sweating and stuff. I don't leave the gym weight training wise sweating ever anymore. But
you do enough exercise.
Yeah, I think I have that checked out. The sweat stuff checked off. When you live in Florida too, it's like it never ends anyways. But
winter hit like a fucking bomb here.
Did it? Are you snow already?
We had snow this morning. It's -2 right now. It was -7 this morning. It's winter.
What is that, like 20?
25.
25. Good God. Yeah. One of the hardest things, man, when working with clients is when they do have an injury and it's getting close to the meet, telling them like, hey, it's okay if we miss training, right? Because your strength's there. Your strength's not going to leave. Like we have plenty of research anecdotally and within the science that shows like strength doesn't leave that fast. And as long as you're able to maintain, like I have a client right now who has a knee problem, and it's like whenever he squats, his knees bothering him. And I've kind of deduced it down to he's lacking some stability there, right? Because he's in wraps and he's losing some proprioceptive feel. And, maybe we didn't do enough preventative stuff with adductors. Or
is he wrapping to the inside or to the outside? I know that sounds stupid, but it makes a difference for me.
It's a valid point, depending on how you move that patella, right? I don't know. It's something I'll have to ask him. But it's like, hey, man, if we had squats today, and it's like, hey, if squats are feeling good, then push it. If not, don't worry about it. But last week we kind of called it quits. I was like, let's just focus on trying to rebuild some stability. We'll do some unsupported hip airplanes. We'll do some single leg holds on a cushion pad, just to kind of start building TKEs, just to start bringing back some stability and get that leg feeling comfortable again under load, because it's not a serious injury. But once you start to lose that ability to stabilize heavy load, you're going to lose force production. And then you're going to put a lot of stress on the other leg. And then that's when that other leg is going to have problems, not the actual knee. So just telling them to like, hey, back off when they're 3 weeks out from a meet. People aren't used to that, right? Because 3 weeks out is like, I got to hit that last heavy single. It's like, well, no, you don't. You don't have to hit that last heavy single. Do it at the meet. Right? You're not going to lose that strength.
And I can attest to that 100%, because so after I had my knee surgery in 2015, I came back and did two meets in 27. Sorry, surgery 2015, 2 meets 2016. And then I was still having the hip issues. I didn't address the hip issues, kept pushing it. And it was my left knee had the surgery. I went in that third meet that I decided to do, tore my right quad, because that whole time I was shifting into that right leg.
Yep.
And even to this day, there's a very significant visual discrepancy in the size of my lateralis on the left side compared to the right side, because like the neural tone to that left side is just non-existent.
Yeah.
Like when I do leg extensions on that, any leg extension movement, I have to do it single leg because my right leg will just take over.
And you think due to the injury, you had some neural mechanisms get derailed, or?
Yeah. So part of the hip issues that I have now, it's because there's like my squat pattern is like wonky all of a sudden because there's something going on in the hip that doesn't stabilize it the same way.
Mm-hmm.
So what I think part of the reason I think my hamstring took the brunt of it was that my stance progressively got wider in the knee wraps. But now that I'm not squatting in knee wraps anymore, I'm more narrow and I feel way more stable.
Yeah.
So as I increase the demand for external rotation at my hip, the knee gets more and more and more unstable.
Makes sense, right? Because you're going to ranges that you're not used to doing under the heaviest loads possible, right? Like if you train your entire training program with a closer stance, and then as soon as you put reps on, it gets wider and wider, and the load gets heavier and heavier, you haven't built up that capacity for your body to accept that range of motion yet. So of course there's going to be instability there. Yep. So then it's like, well, how can you troubleshoot that, moving forward, right? To get ready for that is if you continue to have the tendency to have a wider base with reps, then maybe adding in some like wide pause squats, right?
Yeah.
And not in reps, just for your off-season type training, right? Just so your body's, or do some rails, some cars, some stuff like that, some FRC stuff to where your body's going to be able to handle that load in that position.
Yeah. I thought of like, my entire prep was done with the same stance, but my whole off season was done. Yeah. The whole off season was that. I think also too, just being more patient and taking the time to learn squatting narrower in the knee wraps could also, like just fix the problem. But that's a problem for a year and a half from now.
Yeah.
And
because that's something that I've had to talk with one of my clients, Josh Spaeth, really good squatter.
So strong,
very strong guy. And he's, now that I've actually coached him and worked with him, his level of strength to me is mind blowing now that I know him personally, if you know what I mean.
Yep.
Yeah. So he was trying to get ready for a wrap meet 6 to 8 weeks after the showdown, which is a sleeve meet. So he can qualify for like these bigger meets. But because we didn't have time to work on wraps, he just felt super unstable in them. And he's like, my warm-ups are feeling better than my warm-ups did for showdown. So I'm just going to dump the wraps and get ready for the meet. And we did that at 3 weeks out. And he feels better now than he did for the showdown.
That's awesome. He's so strong. You posted like his meet results from the showdown. I was like, holy shit.
Yeah, he added 7. I don't know. I'm giving myself too much of a credit, but I think he added like 70 pounds to his total.
Well, that's all you, right? It has nothing to do with his effort.
Absolutely not. But I want to make sure that I'm getting the actual number down right. It was either like 70 or 40 pounds, but 70 sounds so much better.
I keep telling Olivia, because like she's doing her first meet in January at the hybrid showdown. She just squatted like 310 for 3 at an RPE 7. She pulled 350 for 3 at a 7 and benched 190 for 3 at a 7.
Yeah, nice. Very
I'm
strong.
like, you're gonna total 1,000 pounds in your first meet, and I'm gonna take all the credit.
Of course, and rightfully so.
Yeah, I did.
She doesn't know what she's doing.
No clue.
No, she's not strong by accident. But yeah, having these kind of like discussions with your athletes is really important, because I just had one too, who I do her nutrition and I do her training, and she's a like perpetual dieter, and she usually diets right around 2,500 calories and then like goes down from there. Well, we worked her up to 4,200 calories.
Holy shit.
And only a 5-pound increase in weight.
That's sick.
Right. And then you would assume because you did that, you would be dieting from a higher start point.
Right.
not always the case, right?
Right.
Sometimes you've been dieting for so long that your body's only going to respond to that 2,200, 2,000 calories. So we got her down to like 2,500 calories. Her body hasn't budged. And it's like, look, like you feel good. You're hitting PRs. You're out totaling your wrapped total in sleeves, in training. Let's just stay where we're at. And let's just stay at the 181 weight class. Let's not try to make 165. And her husband convinced her of it. And I was like, oh, good. Then I don't even have to try anymore. Like, you're good. You're ready to go. And I'm like, we just need to spend a year around 4,000 calories, 4,500 calories. So your body is now able to process that a little bit better. And that still might not even do the trick. Some people are just so metabolically adaptive that they're just so used to cutting. Like Austin Stout does this all the time. He'll get up to 5,000-6,000 calories in the off season, but his body only starts responding at X amount of calories when he starts to diet. And it's taken him years for that budget to continue to move over and over again. But when you're dealing with women and perpetual dieters, it's something that we just have to always take into account, right? The idea is like, hey, if we can get your calories up, we'll get your metabolism healthy, we'll get you really strong, maybe add a little bit of muscle. And hopefully when we start the dieting process, you can diet at a higher calorie count, but it's just not always the case, right?
Yeah, that's actually my goal. My goal right now is to just continuously up my calories every week and see kind of what happens to my body weight. Because if I'm competing at 242, I got like 7 pounds I can play with and still walk into the weight class. And my body composition is still really solid. My training volume is really high. So it's not like I'm not burning the calories. So I'm going to try like basically this whole past year, I've been at maintenance. I haven't really changed my macros at all, maybe within 100 or 200 calories.
Yeah.
But I've just been eating, not being hungry, recovering as best I could. Now I'm going to see if I can really like push the calories up. And Scott's back. And hopefully then when I start with Chris in the new year, he said around February, then he'll have a good base to work with and I'll be deep in the off season.
Dr. Scott, welcome back.
Wow. That was just like, boom. The light went out, man. There's nothing going on.
It's fun. We were just talking about that before, how you had to update your Zoom, and like it's always at the most inappropriate times does technology seem to fail on us.
I had a diabolical crash a week and a half ago. Everything was crashing and my computer didn't even recognize that there was an admin. Like I tried to just, it wouldn't there was no admin. It's like, how can that be? Like,
oh man,
it took me the entire day. I just love restarting and adding things in. I had to change all my passwords. It was awful.
I bet that drove you crazy. Like there's certain instances we didn't stop recording. We just kept talking.
Okay.
So we're still recording, but there's certain instances where like, you have to do stuff in a day and you get it all done, but it's so unnecessary and you feel so unproductive.
Yes.
Right. And I guarantee you that's how you felt. Like, I have to get this done. I have to get my computer up and going or else I can't do anything. But that entire day felt like a wash for you, I'm sure.
I've had this happen so many times that I'm so aware of that when I start to have a flash of that sense, then I'm just like, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have to hop off at 4:30. Let's continue.
Yeah, let's roll, definitely. So one thing I was going to add is that there are different types of hormones. There are steroid hormones. There are peptide hormones like insulin and growth hormone would be the peptide hormone. Steroid hormones like cortisol, progesterone, estrogen, testosterone, of course. So those are all things that are worth kind of knowing and that there are different types of hormones. I'm trying to load up my notes here. Everything was so slow going. So those are some basics. I think we can throw up the very first image you threw up.
Okay.
Let's put that one back up. So this is where if you can get this, you got a good handle on a lot of things. Excellent. Yeah. So this is a typical steroidal axis. And this is it's a homeostatic mechanism and it works just like your home's thermostat would pretty much. So with a thermostat, you change, let's say you've got a thermostat that some of them work this way. You've got both a heater and an air conditioner, so you can cool and heat. And if you set the temperature at 72 and it gets below that, then the heater would come on. If it gets above that, then the air conditioner would come on. So you've got some feedback inhibition, or you could have feed forward inhibition in this way too, with turning the heat on or turning the air conditioning on or what have you. Basically, with hormones, we're basically regulating the amount of the production of the end hormone through the connection between, in this case, two different glandular or endocrine glands, the hypothalamus and pituitary. So people talk exactly HPTA, the hypothalamic pituitary testicular axis. Some people just call it the HPGA, gonadal, because the only gonads are not the testes, the ovaries are those in women and females. So what we have here is a kind of a nice system because it's got multiple regulatory points, because we've got multiple hormones that are really involved here. So a hypothalamus release gonadotropin releasing hormone that stimulates the pituitary, and those two structures are in the brain to release the gonadotrophins. So the gonadotropin releasing hormone, GnRH, stimulates the release of the gonadotrophins, which are trophic to the gonads. In this case, we're talking about the testes, and those two gonadotrophins are follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. So you're thinking follicles, what are the follicles? Well, the follicles are actually a structure that you're going to find in the ovaries of women, but it's the same gonadotrophin in men and women, so we just call it that. Luteinizing hormone actually is involved with the corpus luteum, which is something that develops during the second half of the menstrual ovarian cycle in women. So but it's the same hormone, LH. In fact, essentially, the pregnancy hormone, so to speak, gonadotropin chorionic, human chorionic gonadotropin, is another gonadotropin that comes from the chorion, which is a structure in the developing embryo if you've had implantation and a pregnancy that's beginning. And that basically does the same thing as luteinizing hormone. So it kind of takes over for luteinizing hormone. So that's why guys would use HCG, a pregnancy hormone, because it's doing the same thing as luteinizing hormone. And there's some cross receptivity between the receptors for luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. So you will use HCG that will cause an increase in testosterone production. And that's one way of doing HRT. Some doctors have done that as sort of a monotherapy, just use HCG and replace the missing gonadotropin stimulus. There's a study, I think it's the European aging study, that suggests that like 50% of andropause sufferers, so men with low testosterone levels late in old age as testosterone levels decline, who would be candidates then for TRT, are low in testosterone because they've got low LH levels. So it's not they've got a primary gonadotropin, a primary testicular issue. So the low testosterone is because the testes just can't put out enough testosterone. They've got an inadequate signal from the brain. So something's dysregulated here in this sequence of events. So the way the regulation happens, well, it's multiple ways. One, you can see the blue circle there at the bottom is our sort of end androgen, the primary androgen that we're worried about, testosterone, and that will feedback inhibit. So what happens is the brain can then sense the levels of testosterone in the body through the bloodstream, because we're talking about an endocrine action here, and it will feedback and it will inhibit both the release from the hypothalamus and the release from the pituitary in terms of how much of the GnRH and the gonadotrophins are being released. So if testosterone levels go too high, then gonadotropin levels go down because both the hypothalamus and the pituitary are being inhibited.
That would be the mechanism for testicular atrophy with steroid use, with testosterone use.
You've got no gonadotrophins there. You've got nothing in the FSH, by the way, in males has a similar action. It's for spermatogenesis.
Right.
So it's turning on the production of sperm and the development of sperm. So yeah, you're going to have loss of testicular mass and potential even sterility. That's why it's not very effective. We know this for sure. It's bantered about, that many, like Ronnie Coleman being the example people point to, probably maybe it might have partaken of some PEDs during his years.
Smidge.
And I think maybe a smidge. Although it wasn't much at the beginning. Like I think he was natty up until his early pro years.
That's what I heard.
Yeah.
He won the world amateurs, like 228, and then he's on stage nearly 300. So something produced that leap, and that's a tested show, the amateurs, but the worlds, I mean, and but you can still give birth to children. So
when LH goes down due to endogenous testosterone use, then post-cycle therapy is done with HCG to raise the LH level. But once that goes past the LH and it goes into the GnRH, that's when it's impossible to bring back natural levels of testosterone with HCG? Or like, when do you hit that threshold of you've done too much damage to actually recover through like an HCG type protocol? What are you looking at mechanistically? Does that actually go in line with that, or am I off?
So a couple things. That's the kind of the big question why this is important. Let me add one thing and then I can answer that question.
Yes, sir.
Because that's a really good question. So testosterone, of course, can be aromatized. Everyone kind of knows what that's the aromatization is just a chemical transformation into its sort of female sex steroid counterpart, estrogen. We're looking at estradiol there. It's one of 3 estrogens. And that can then feedback inhibit too, because that would be if testosterone levels being higher, that's like the bucket is too full. And another indication that the bucket is too full would be water leaking out. And I'm not trying to speak disparagingly about estrogen. It has positive benefits, but when you have higher levels of testosterone, you're going to be driving through mass action through the aromatase enzyme complex, the production of more estrogen. More testosterone will mean more estrogen, generally speaking, unless you control that some way. And then that's going to feedback inhibit. So now to your question. So ways that you could treat hypogonadism would be with HCG to sort of supplement and replace what's missing in terms of that gonadotrophic stimulus. Or this is why people would use Novodex or Clomid, is to prevent the inhibition that happens through estrogen. So one of the controlling factors of how much GnRH and LH and FSH you have is going to be how much estrogen you have. So the estrogenic signal is dampening the release of gonadotropins. And if you can block that dampening and that reduction, inhibit the inhibitor, or keep the foot off the brake, so to speak, then the flux through this axis, which just means the connection between the different endocrine glands, can be greater. So that's where Clomid or Novodex would be used. So when you use, and here's the thing, when you use HCG, you're not stimulating LH release. You're actually replacing it. So that's the kind of the trick there is in the same way that if you're, and I've looked, and I think I maybe found like one rat study, you don't typically see that LH inhibits LH. That would be an autocrine action. So that would be LH levels being, when they're coming from those pituitary gonadotropin producing cells, and the pituitary produces a number of trophic hormones, and they all are interacting with one another too. This is a place where you can integrate, for instance, thyroid stimulating hormone and growth hormone release, et cetera, because you've got all those hormones, the number of hormones, the pituitary hormones coming from the same very, very small gland. But if you've got HCG coming in, supplanting the LH, then you're not stimulating the whole axis to be up and running. You're basically, it's kind of like you want an engine to be running on itself, and you're just kind of kickstarting it continuously, and it's sort of running, but it's not quite going.
Right.
But what the kickstarting can do, and this is what Paul was kind of getting at, and one of the things you want to have is, let's say, someone goes on a heavy cycle, let's say someone's on for years, could be, the kind of the worst case scenario. and they haven't done anything to sort of keep any aspect of this cycle or this axis in place, meaning they haven't done anything to supplant the missing signal now from the pituitary to the testicles, then you're going to have testicular atrophy.
Right.
And then even if you would and could get the hypothalamus to the pituitary sending out a normal gonadotrophic signal, now you've got a itsy bitsy teensy weensy raisin sized pair of engines running the show, and you're not going to have good testosterone production. That's the issue. I mean, there's some, and I can't remember the nuances of the study, but there's also some suggestion. And this is what one of the things that Dr. Chrysler, who passed away a few years ago, was kind of big on, and sort of, I think he introduced this mainly into the bodybuilding world, is that the typical idea that you would take like a 5 or a 10,000 IU vial of HCG, that's how it's packaged typically, or 1,000 or 2,000, anything above 1,000 or even above 500, I think you would say, is much more than what you'd get from a physiological burst of luteinizing hormone, which you're replacing with HCG, and that you can actually desensitize the testes. We know, and I'm blanking on, there's a name of the bodybuilders still use this sometimes. I want to say it's Pregnil, but that may not be right. There's a drug that basically is a gonadotropin releasing hormone analog, and it's used, you could use that as in the same way you think, okay, well, my pituitary hasn't been getting this GnRH signal from the hypothalamus. Let's use use a GnRH analog to try to like kind of prime that part of the system.
Be like HMG. Would that be one of them?
HMG is actually a mix of FSH and LH.
Okay.
It's human menopausal gonadotropin.
Gotcha.
So yeah, that's nice. Like that's both the gonadotropins mixed together. But no, this is I can look it up real quick. It's something that some guys still use. But the thing is, the primary use for that drug, and this was done to my dad. My dad had prostate cancer. Is they give you a giant dose of that, and they kind of, I think the term that's used is they flash dose the pituitary with this, and they burn out the pituitary with a monstrous dose of this GnRH analog.
Yeah.
And
Oh, wow.
I've looked, there's not like a whole lot of evidence, but who knows, what might have happened to it. But using monstrous, way super physiological doses of HCG to replace LH to get the testicles up and running again probably doesn't make sense. This is why a smarter idea that many will take on, I'm not giving any medical advice here, is to try to use a smaller amount of HCG when you're on cycle so that you maintain testicular mass, so that when you do a PCT or you come off, you have now you've got to deal with the hormonal regulation, which is dysregulated, but at least you've got the testicles as the engine for testosterone production still able to function, because they've been doing that. You've been stimulating that with an LH analog.
Okay, yeah, because I was going to ask, how can we focus on keeping this as healthy as possible? And you're saying that potentially introducing low amounts of HCG while you're doing stuff will allow that engine to stay as big as when you started.
That's the idea. I mean, it's a nice cosmetic thing. Like sometimes that will be a pure reason why an HRT doc would give them. It's like, hey doc, sex drive's back up. I'm with my partner now, and I just don't look quite as good as I used to. The boys, like, where are they? They're hiding out for some reason. And of course, I've heard this a million one times, if someone would say, I just got the single dose, vial amp of HCG and pop that open, and they put in 10,000 IUs, and yeah, I got a monstrous swelling, but my balls were like twice the normal size. Like that's also kind of indicative that's maybe a bit much.
Right.
The thing too, and this is where people question, and I think this is something we could kind of delve into, is like, what are healthy levels, or what are normal levels of estrogen going to be?
Yeah.
When you're on cycle, and what's a reason to keep them at a normal level? Well, if you look here at the top part of the diagram there, the figure, you've got an estrogenic inhibition of hypothalamic output of GnRH. So this isn't to say if you're using a gram of androgens that's not going to inhibit the hypothalamus. But if estrogen levels are also high, or you've got aromatizing compounds, you've basically got a diminution of hypothalamic gonadotropin releasing hormone output. It's going to go down. If estrogen levels are less, maybe you'll have a less inhibition there, and you might have some petering out of GnRH. That's more than it would otherwise. So you're trying to not completely like stomp on those brain structures in terms of the inhibition that's coming. The androgens you're going to get.
Sorry to interrupt. If I'm understanding correctly, it's not like an on-off switch. It's not a light switch. It's more of like a tap, like a water tap.
Yes.
Okay. Good.
Yeah. And you can turn it on and off pretty rapidly, like letrozole, let's say, something like that, which really reduces estrogen levels pretty rapidly. Then you could have a pretty abrupt reduction of that estrogenic inhibition. It wouldn't necessarily manifest in an abrupt increase in testosterone, but letrozole, I don't think I've ever seen that used in a study for an HRT or studying a hypogonadal population, because it's so good at reducing estrogen. It's usually used in breast cancer studies.
Yeah, I was going to say, have they done any research like that on the suicidal type of estrogen reduction things?
I haven't seen that in conjunction. I think I've seen it studied in men, just to see to what extent you see a diminution of estrogen. Yeah. But I don't think I've ever seen it where they're looking to see how much testosterone elevation you can get.
So a lot of people talk about the safer use model of PED. That's a big thing that a lot of guys are kind of hanging their hats on now. And the understanding would be that you use different compounds to reduce the amount of estrogen that you're actually producing, right? So that you don't have this negative inhibition double folded, right? So the idea would be to pick different compounds that don't aromatize, as opposed to doing stuff like a Nolvadex or an Aromacin, which have negative, potential negative side effects in and of themselves, right? If you do take them, is that kind of the safer use model that a lot of those guys are kind of being indicative of? Is that idea, or is there something that is like, are AIs and SERMs and things like that as harmful as in different compounds would be to keep the estrogen at bay, I guess would be it.
I think that was a complex question because it's a complex area to try to figure out. So yeah, you've got, and actually it's a kind of a good segue for one of these other tables. I think it's that last table, last figure I sent you.
All right. Let's pull that up.
Yeah, we can throw that up there. You can make it any bigger. Yeah. So this is just generic table.
Yeah, it's not coming in any clearer.
My bad. Yeah.
Oh, it's fine.
Yeah, it's decent. I mean, I've got a big screen so I can see it, but
okay, perfect.
Basically, this kind of shows that there's different diseases that are associated with overly elevated estrogen and low estrogen. So like osteoporosis and arthralgia, joint pain. So we know about osteoporosis and menopause, not a good thing. Joint pain is one of the things to connect this with your question with using aromatase inhibitors in particular. That one seems to come up when people start having joint pain. Mm-hmm. So you could have joint pain simply because you've reduced your estrogen too much.
Right.
Estrogen has generally anti-inflammatory actions. It has free radical quenching actions as well. So it's kind of an antioxidant. That's probably why, and partly those reasons are probably why it's women seem to have a reduced risk of cardiovascular disease. See, Paul? Sorry, I wish I hadn't when I had that crash. Yeah,
it happens.
Yeah, and we messed around chatting when we got started. So focusing then on the low estrogen. There's also some other Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. Those are interesting. Those are diseases of aging. The connection there, I have to look at those references, see what the connection there is directly, but those are things that happen obviously in women and men. But there's a number of different things, too high or too low. So keeping estrogen in somewhere of a normal range sort of makes sense.
Right.
Then there's also what's going to go on with you're using a SERM or aromatase inhibitor. What are the negative side effects you could have there that could come into play?
Right,
So,
'cause
go ahead.
I was just going to say a lot of them are associated with higher LDL, lower HDL type of stuff, which is already going to be skewed based on what you're taking to begin with.
Right. Yeah. So, if you're someone who, has a family history of cardiovascular disease, and let's say, you're just generally have a skewing of your lipids that is worse than maybe the average person, or because of whatever you're using, you need to be very careful of that, then that would be something to pay attention to even more so. It's all going to be kind of guesswork as far as what your risk factors are and how those actually play out.
Is there a way by looking at blood work to make it not as much guesswork? Like, is there certain markers we should be looking at, or is it just guesswork based on, how you react to things and pulling it and putting it back in and stuff like that?
Well, there's, all the aspects of your lipid profile, having high HDL and low LDL, your ratios are important. You can start looking at particle size. You can do things like calcium scans for your heart. There's a number of diagnostic tests you can do.
Right.
Let's just, as much information as we can take from what John Meadows left with us, and we can bring into our mind. I'll do that. So I'll just bring up John. John, and I don't know all of the details of John's medical situation. I wasn't his doctor. We talked about a lot of this stuff. John was doing everything he possibly could to keep himself as healthy as possible. Especially, he took obviously lots of risks as a bodybuilder. He knew that, right. But he was not like throw caution to the wind type of guy at all. On this, he was very much on the bottom of the spectrum as far as bodybuilding goes, and he was doing everything he could. He had a really good, his medical record was great at the end. I'm not going to go into the details of things that, that he and I talked about, but he was doing pretty well. In fact, I was more upbeat and excited about, like, he was overly critical. It's like, well, what about this guy? I'm like, John looks pretty good to me. It's like, are you sure? It's like, I want to make sure. Like, he was on it. And, he's passed now, he's gone. So you never can totally tell, but that's why, and listen, I get questions all the time, medical questions on Instagram or Facebook, whatever. Your health is more important than to get an answer from somebody on Instagram who doesn't know you and know your medical history. Right. I say this, too many times. Seriously, it's like no one could possibly know. Yeah. And I'm a licensed acupuncturist. I maintain the license, but I don't actively practice. But just in my field of medicine, in that way, you sit down. The first time you talk with someone, you spend 2 hours asking them literally about 100 questions, figuring out everything, and that includes like digging into Western medicine related stuff. A good doctor is going to dig into everything. Yeah, and he's going to he's going to look into your family history of all the major diseases you might have, piece all those things together. You might even go into doing a genetic analysis. You might need to go into a particle size analysis of your LDLs, of your lipids. You might need to do, okay, your creatine's high, or your creatinine levels are high. We need to measure cystatin C here instead. We need to do this, that, reactive C protein to look at inflammation. There's a million things that you could throw in there, and you could keep on doing that, for months and years, and do it as best as you possibly can, like John was, and still not cover every base. So to answer your question, there's a million and one things you want to look into. The question that I think is sort of the biggest one that we don't really have an answer to, and that is like, it's almost would be impossible to guess, is what are the healthiest levels of estrogen? And we've got estradiol, estriol, and estrone. There's 3 estrogens really. And estradiol seems to be the one that is the highest biological activity relative to its levels in the blood. But in the context of someone who's got a pharmacological excess of androgenic action, because he or she is using anabolic steroids, what the question then becomes physiologically or pathophysiologically, how much estrogenic action is going to be helpful in balancing that out. So estrogen being anti-inflammatory, free radical scavenging in nature, something that tends to reduce your risk of cardiovascular disease, just looking at women versus men. Would it make sense? And I'm not saying I don't know the answer. This is sort of the $1 million question. Would it make sense for your estrogen levels if your testosterone or your total androgen levels are, let's say, 4 or 5 times normal? Because instead of 200 milligrams of androgens coming in, you've got 1,000 milligrams of androgen coming in. Do you then need to have 4 or 5-fold higher estrogen levels? And what are the relative estrogenic actions of those things that you're taking in that are now aromatizing? So you've got different aromatizable compounds. Some of them are, some of them aren't. Like for instance, if sometimes your estrogen levels will, and here's the problem too, is that you can actually end up interfering with the estrogen analyses on the blood because of the androgens you're using. And you can also end up shifting the relative population of those different forms of estrogen too in the blood work. So are you going to do a full-blown estrogen analysis to figure out what's going on there? The other issue, and I've got, this was in this, if we did a PowerPoint that I could go through and nail these one at a time, we'd have all this, but it's fine. You've got different estrogen receptors, the typical genomic ones. So estrogen being a steroid hormone, it's traditionally taught actions are very long standing and long acting. So it comes in to the cell, it's lipid lipophilic, so it's lipid soluble. It comes in, binds to the estrogen receptor, and then exerts an effect on the nucleus whereby a number of genes are expressed. And that's going to vary based on the cells or the tissue type. But there's also 2 different estrogen receptors. There's an alpha and a beta. And generally activating the alpha is the thing that produces these anti-inflammatory and free radical scavenging actions. The estrogen beta form actually has anabolic and anti-catabolic actions in the few studies that I found. So they can use estrogen beta specific agonists, drugs that activate specifically that receptor and not the other one. And that's where you see this happen. And you have in, for instance, skeletal muscle, both of those. We ended up going to this on my podcast a few days ago with Scott McNally. And this is why, for instance, when you look at cattle implants, they have trenbolone and estradiol in there because that gives you a greater growth effect overall. It also increases marbling, I believe. So there's anabolic effects of estrogen.
Now,
go ahead.
Are those anabolic effects predisposed to a certain type of estrogen, the beta cells, or are they predisposed to all 3 types?
They're not beta cells. Actually, that's a type of cell in the pancreas when people say beta.
Yeah, sorry, I mean beta, alpha, and beta adrenergic receptors. Is that what they are?
So there's adrenal receptors. This is what I was almost misspeaking too, because so there's alpha and beta adrenal receptors. So those would receive epinephrine or norepinephrine, or those are what clenbuterol or albuterol bind to, those sorts of things.
Right.
So adrenal receptor, you can have beta blockers are used for people with hypertension to bring their heart rate down. So those block the beta adrenal receptors.
Right.
So those are antagonistic to adrenaline, and that we're talking here about different forms of the estrogen receptor.
Gotcha.
There's an alpha and a beta. Let's just start naming it with Greek letters. Just like there's the A and the B, the C and the D is just alpha, beta, blah, blah, blah. So both of those are found in skeletal muscle. And I don't know to what degree there's variability there. Some guys find that they don't grow well if they take too many aromatase inhibitors.
Right.
And they want to have some estrogen there. Those populations vary, by individual across tissues anyway. And I don't know, like there's, supposedly, anadrol is, not supposed to have an ability to aromatize, but it certainly seems like it has estrogenic actions. somehow,
Yeah.
and could that could be through progesterone. I've not seen that it's a progestin that I can think of off the top of my head, but I don't pay that close attention to this stuff because a lot of it's just, so much of it's just guesswork.
Right. Exactly.
Literature won't quite tell you. And I've got actually a whole other slide on progesterone. That's another hormone we haven't even gotten into yet, which
Yeah.
is present in men basically about in the same amount as women at the beginning of their menstrual cycle, at least. We have a substantial amount of progesterone too.
Right.
So to get back to your question, the question is, where is the ideal place? You have things to balance. So here's what you're kind of juggling if you're someone who's using PEDs, and I think that's kind of where we're trying to direct this information is how much. And I can't, I don't have an exact answer that I can give. Unfortunately, I sound a little bit like Victoria, I think, because it's like everyone's so different.
Right.
But you can pay attention. Yeah, we can do another one for sure.
Okay. That way we can get Paul back on.
Okay. You want to keep going on this one?
Yeah, until you find a good stopping point.
Okay. All right. Well, I got like one more slide we can cover. That last one, just to give the women their due. But I'll finish this thought. And the thought is, you've got effects on lipid profile, so cardiovascular, negative cardiovascular profile effects of an aromatase inhibitor, let's say, as a kind of an example of one thing you want to juggle. And then, estrogen having its own effects on joint pain, and having positive cardiovascular benefits. And the question is, we don't know how much you want to have necessarily. Estrogen also is involved with distribution of body fat. So
right.
One thing, people will feel really bad if they go high on the anti-E's. They can tell that it just sort of ruins their mood. It just makes them miserable.
Mm-hmm.
But that's something that does seem to help with body fat loss. I've had people come to me and they ran out of the anti-E's and they're not making any gains and losing body fat. And, that ends up being the thing. After a while, I'm like, tell me what are you doing to control estrogen? It's like, oh, nothing anymore. I said, you usually? It's like, yeah, I always do, but I ran out. It's like, okay, is anything else different that you can think of? And we go through it all. It's like, it's that. So,
and do you think that's prevalent to the amount of receptors they have? Because does everyone need some type of estrogen blocker to get as lean as possible, or can it be done with, right? So do you think that's something that has to do with how many actual receptors they have as compared to the androgenic ones? Or
I think some of it is, we just look at natty competitors.
Right.
They get as lean or leaner than the enhanced guys.
Right.
Who knows? One reason for that could be, and this has been documented in case studies, is when you diet down to like 4% and you're natural, your testosterone levels go in the bucket, and so does your estrogen.
Estrogen follows suit.
Yeah. And that is, who knows, that may be something that was sort of genetically evolutionarily engineered into us to allow body fat release at those really low levels, because estrogen is there
for energy purposes. Right?
That's why women have more body fat. Women are programmed to have more body fat because they kind of need that as an energy reserve to support pregnancy in worst case scenario when there's nothing around to feed the fetus.
Right.
So some people do, some people don't. It's like one of the things that, for instance, like a lot of the guys, not so much in the US, where pros will use more, or high level competitors like to use test is best. But like some of the Middle Eastern guys, if you ever look at the world amateurs, and these guys, it's not tested anymore. If you look at some of those shows, they'll be completely off for an off season. But when they start, they go hard and they go on only non-aromatizing stuff.
Right.
And those guys, if you watch the weigh-in videos for those on YouTube, you ever seen those videos before?
No.
Oh, it just literally, you're like, dude, it's diced. Holy shit, that guy's peeled. Oh my God, ridiculous. Like everybody, there is not one guy who's not just out of his mind shredded. They're all, and this is a high level competition.
Right.
But it's always been sort of speculated that some of that is, mindset, culture. Like, we're a little bit soft in the US sometimes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So there's some of that. But it might also be too that, there is some effect on, we know obviously, especially in the lower body, there's an effect of estrogen on
Right.
body fat. So it's not necessarily, some of it can be relative receptor density. It could be receptor binding affinity and activity. I don't know that much about the estrogen receptor. I could look, maybe someone's documented this. There's there's a couple different spots, at least in the androgen receptor in the gene, that vary, that will change the amino acid composition of the receptor and change its binding affinity for androgens.
Okay.
And this has been studied. I've talked about this a few times on podcasts now, but this has been studied actually in the context of prostate cancer. Those individuals, actually, it's been studied in the context of race or skin color or whatever word they happen to use. It's been, they've called it race or ethnicity, I think, depending on which study you look at. But African Americans, or blacks, as they've been categorized in some of the studies, have a higher rate of prostate cancer.
Right.
And that's associated with having a different number of glutamine repeats in the code for the androgen receptor, which changes the shape and changes the binding affinity. So they have a stronger binding of DHT in the prostate, which drives a malignancy there in the prostate. So prostate cancer rates are higher. So they kind of figure that out. So that's something that is involved with the androgen. There's probably something there with the estrogen receptor. I would not be surprised at all. And it could be the relative population of those. It's going to be genetically. But the large part, I think it's just the fact that you can have more estrogenic activity or more estrogen. One of the things that I like, as just to try to drive this down into something that's practical, is I just got a question today on this, actually, on Instagram, believe it or not. I just saw it come across. Is a lot of guys, an old school way to like go into a show would be to like drop all your compounds.
Yeah.
Like 2 weeks out. And that makes sense to me. In one hand, if you're someone who's been like using incrementally higher stuff, and you're sort of toxing yourself out and stressing yourself out in a way, and you're holding water because of that, you could have a detox effect potentially. Kind of depends on what you're using. The other thing that could happen too is that if you've got androgens that were coming in and some of those were aromatizing, and now you remove the incoming androgens, you've still got androgens leaving the depot where you've injectables gone in and being stripped of that esterified fatty acid and then aromatizing. So you've got the estrogen levels are going to climb over the course of the time thereafter.
Yeah.
That will happen like anybody, which just like comes off, 1,000 milligrams of test a week, they'll get an estrogen burst. So you're setting yourself up for water retention. If someone were to do that and not pay attention, depending on what they were using.
Don't you kind of see that too with like how often they inject themselves, right? So if you have somebody that's doing TRT and they do it every 2 weeks, they have higher fluctuations of estrogen and testosterone imbalances because of the pulsing and the half-life. And then if you do it more frequently, like every other day or every 3 days, it's a little bit more even, a little bit more level. Am I correct in that assumption?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, like unless you're using like Nebido or like a Cestanon or something like that, like a long acting testosterone preparation, you're going to get even enanthate, this half-life of 7 days, that's variable.
Right.
And the thing about that is like there's one, as far as I know, there's one main enzyme. It's a phosphodiesterase in the liver that strips that enanthate off of there, and that largely dictates what your area under the curve is for the free testosterone levels.
Mm-hmm.
And I've looked down, I have to go back and look again. I look periodically for these things, but I can't imagine the liver doesn't adapt to the levels of that enzyme to some degree after a first injection.
Right.
It probably gets better at that. So your half-life is going to change. It probably gets much better at doing that.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what's going on there over time. So every week, if you look at like just the basic pharmacokinetic studies for like an enanthate, like you got to spike it like 24, 48 hours. And then, you're hypogonadal by the end of the week, feel like shit. So some guys, if they have a 1 week thing, that they do it all like on, Thursday or Friday night. So they feel good over the weekend. And then they feel like dog shit on Thursday,
Right. Yeah, exactly.
but yeah, and that's going to impact or get an estrogen burst,
Right.
from that, because you're just driving more flux through the enzyme with the aromatase enzyme complex. So yeah, so this last thing you tossed up, this is just worth, and this is like, it's a whole other, this is a whole year of school, medical
Right.
school,
This is what we
basically.
talked to Victoria about for an hour and a half
Yeah,
and
so
barely touched the surface of it.
right, so this is nice to have. This is actually a figure that oh, it didn't come through in what I sent you, but this is a Wikimedia Commons open source. So I haven't stolen this from anyone. That's not a copyrighted figure, but it's a really nice one.
Mhm.
This is what shows you what happens in your typical quote unquote lunar cycle, which is both a menstrual cycle and an ovarian cycle. So you can look at the typical female cycle from the perspective of what's going on in the uterus, in the endometrium, and that's the bottom here. And this sort of the height of this looks like kind of like a curve, actually represents the thickness of the endometrium. So these first few days, the first few days there, or during menses, it's kind of red. That's sort of if someone would have like a 7-day bleeding period. This is in your standard, regulated, idealized cycle. Nowadays, it's very uncommon, but it does happen.
Right.
To find that. So you can see there the bar just above it says menstruation. So that's the follicle phase. So that's where follicle stimulating hormone would be driving the development of a follicle. And eventually, this is what's really cool. I don't think I've ever seen, I'm sure they've figured this out, but there's like tens of thousands of follicles in the ovaries. That could be the one. That could be the neo that gets to come out, and become the candidate that produced you and produced me on that particular month when the conception happens. But one of them will sort of step out. It's like, okay, we need one volunteer, just one, and kind of comes to the forefront, and you get an estrogen elevation there, and estradiol and progesterone will go up too. Sometimes your progesterone going up a little bit earlier than that, but basically the sort of coordination here, this is kind of the magic of all this, that produces an ovulation. And if you look at just above there, it shows body temperature, showing an increase of 0.5 to 1 degrees Celsius. So this is why a lot of women, when they're using they're trying to either get pregnant or not get pregnant, they'll measure their body temperature to see when they're ovulating. And women's sex drive also goes up about this time too. So you've got a few days in there where this is when a sperm could make its way in and hit the bullseye. Actually takes a number of them. Like it's a whole the miracle of life. I think you can find it on YouTube. It's it's like a 30-45 minute video, and they have, I don't even know how they produced it because it's from like the 1980s or something.
Yeah.
Have you seen it before?
I have seen it.
Yeah, like your A&P class. I still think it's cool. They show
it
the
is
birth
very
and everything.
cool. Yeah,
it's very beautiful. So you show ovulation there, and then progesterone levels will increase. So progesterone means pro-gestation. It's kind of what the name of that or the hormone comes from. Gestation is the period where the embryo and the fetus is growing. It's the gestational period, which is pregnancy, basically. So that is to promote gestation. And you see during the menstrual cycle, illustration on the bottom, that the endometrium is growing there in that second half, off to the right now in the luteal phase. So you have so that's the endometrium that will be growing. That's where you're going to have implantation of a fertilized egg, and the corpus luteum is what they've got the very top there. That's sort of the generating spot where you once had the egg. If you do have a successful fertilization and implantation and the developing embryo, then that embryo would start producing HCG. It becomes then a chorion. That's the part of this this becomes a blastocyst. They give it about a dozen names throughout the course of pregnancy, but the chorion is the area there in the developing embryo which produces human chorionic gonadotropin, which replaces the functions of LH and tells the ovaries, we need more estrogen, and starts turning on. And then we have progesterone coming into play. And then if you have a pregnancy, then you've got all the things, all the beautiful and wonderful things that happen there over the next 9 months or so.
Okay.
So if there's no pregnancy, then everything sort of tapers off, as you can see, and there's no need for that developed endometrium. We kind of like scrap that, like, whoops, not going to do it this time. And the whole thing happens again.
Yeah.
And it's, it's nice. It's a clear, talk about a biomarker. Like,
Oh yeah.
we're 2 weeks off when, a woman is menstruating. That's not the time that we're going to have pregnancy. So it's kind of clear, and it becomes sort of obvious to a, clear thinking humans. Like, I know I've got a cycle here, and it just so happens to coincide with the 28 days of the moon, which is, probably not entirely coincidental.
No, definitely not. Yeah.
And women obviously synchronize when they get together. That's a very cool phenomenon. I was in acupuncture school with I think 11 or 12 women. I was the only guy in my class.
Okay.
Yeah, about half of them were postmenopausal, roughly.
Mhm.
4 or 5 for sure, and the rest of them were perfectly synchronized. So I knew
Interesting.
never to touch the thermostat, like never come near
Yeah.
that thing, because when they that's their game.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that was pretty cool to watch. They all were a tribe of females with one kind of extra guy there.
Yeah. Interesting. Is that the norm in those type of schools?
I was in a school. I took some classes for about a year before I started that, and it was a class, South Baylo University in LA, but they had Chinese and Korean and English sections. You could take, if you spoke the language, you can take classes in any of those.
Yeah.
And there was more men there.
Okay.
But that represented the sort of, I think maybe and I'm not sure exactly what the sort of the split is demographically in China per se, but there's more men doctors, I think, just generally around the world. So there was more men that were of Asian descent, or even Asians, like literally they were just there on a student visa at that school than at my school. But there weren't a lot of guys at my American acupuncture school relative. It was probably like 3 to 1 for sure. It just so happened.
Okay.
Yeah, that's how it was.
Yeah. Well, no, this is perfect. You laid down a great framework of kind of the fundamentals of the testosterone, the sex hormones in the body. So if we could definitely have you on next time, again, we can kind of go into some of the questions that may arise from now that we understand these things. What are some of the other follow-up questions that we can go into to just kind of pinpoint a little bit more nuance to the topic?
Yeah. See, that's perfect, because people are going to listen to this and be like, oh, that rings a bell. Someone said this one thing about, is that what's happening when I do this and that? It's like, hopefully we can connect some dots. And that's the important part. None of this, did you know all this background stuff? It really doesn't really impact your quality of life, but if you can connect dots,
it allows you to ask better
yourself safer
questions.
And ask better questions and get better answers. That's where the magic is.
Yeah, I found that with schools. Like once you get the fundamentals down, things connect towards, like you said in your class, things connected at the end of that Phil Ivey class, right? And
John Ivey, yep.
John Ivey, yeah. Phil Ivey's the poker player. I always get them confused. But yeah, in the carbohydrate metabolism class, right? And once you get that foundation, then you can start being like, oh, well, this syncs to that. Oh, now this makes sense, and now I can ask this question and it makes sense. So I think it's important to get the fundamentals down for sure.
Yeah, and the value there as well is that you can critically analyze what people are trying to sell you or what people are trying to convince you of.
Yes, sir.
In a solid way. Not that you just want to like try to pick holes and punch holes in people all the time and what they're trying to do, but there's so much that is bro science or pseudoscience or just complete bullshit that sounds very flowery.
Yeah.
And if just a little bit of basic biology is like, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And criticizes me too. If something doesn't make sense that I said, please call me on my contradictions, because I am far from perfect.
Oh yeah,
but
definitely.
Thank you. Having some basic understanding is a really good thing. And I'll say one last thing. It was my dad. He's passed on now, but he had a really solid medical education, and he was an ophthalmologist. But I remember going through when I was in acupuncture school or when I was in during my PhD and just all sorts of things. I would ask him things or talk to him about things of a medical nature. And it was amazing how well he remembered his basic A and P. He just had a really good, solid understanding of that. And that it allowed him to have like a framework, a prism, a lens through which he could see so many things. So, we can talk more about, I have another figure maybe we can do next time.
Yeah, definitely.
About the cholesterol backbone or testosterone backbone, and then what's changed in the different in the 5-alpha reduced and the 19-nor, the DHT derivatives, so to speak, and the 19-nor derivatives, the nandrolone like.
That'd be great.
Yeah, and that is a nice thing because I've seen it discussed a few times. Victor, I haven't gone on to Victor Black's. I think he probably has some of this somewhere, I'm guessing, in his school, and there's some others that you've mentioned that would probably cover this. But that's a nice thing just to like make sense. Like you have it all in one kind of diagram. It's like, oh, this is the whole family of stuff. I've been trying to envision this in this cloud of information, and you can kind of bring it down and put it on the table and sort out the puzzle pieces. I think that would be helpful.
That'd be perfect. Yes, sir. That'd be great.
Cool.
Thank you, Dr. Scott. Appreciate your time as always. And if you guys are interested, check out fortitudetraining.com and check out Dr. Scott's books. He has Fortitude Training and Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach, two of the best books you'll get as far as training and then just understanding the whole bodybuilding process. You can get that all on his website. Either Google Dr. Scott Stevenson, Fortitude Training, Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach. You own almost every domain that there is for that, and it'll all backlink right back to it. So make sure you guys shop through that and shop through him and don't go through those other sites. And then, we'll have you back on and we'll dig into that slide and anything else that you come up with and some questions.
Cool.
All right, Dr. Scott, have a great day.
Yeah.